Welcome everybody, welcome to World History. This is the first video you're going to have with me, and the reason it's coming a little bit later than some of the others is that you guys have been working on your research papers, but now we're going to get into more of a normal flow of how you kind of remember class, with me doing kind of my lectures, you guys reading, and then answering questions along the way. Remember, in this unit we've been talking about the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Scientific Revolution, all which happened pretty closely after each other, but understanding each one of these three events is important to understanding history. So let's start by talking about the Northern Renaissance. The Northern Renaissance is important because it's really marked by the spread of ideas with printing. A guy named Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press after developments made by the Chinese. The interesting thing about the Gutenberg press is that the way it worked was with movable type, and unlike the Chinese versions, because they had so many different characters in their language, the English language only has 26 characters. It only has every letter, and it has more characters than that. It has things like punctuation marks and things like that, but it doesn't number in the thousands the way that Chinese writing does. So what happens is that you can see the picture here, and they would put all the blocks together in the correct way, and then they would actually physically press the ink down onto paper, and then it would create, basically written type. So this was an easy way. Instead of having to copy things by hand, you could have one machine make many pages very quickly. And this was really a revolution in the spreading of ideas. So who was a famous writer during this time? Well, William Shakespeare. I bet you've been reading his stuff in Mr. Ellenboss's class in English. His plays grappled with questions of virtue and morality. This is what the humanists were studying. If you guys remember the humanists, these were the kind of questions they were asking themselves. So the printing and the spread of knowledge. So Protestants, we'll talk about them a little bit later, they pushed ordinary citizens to become literate and understand the Bible. And this meant that writers could spread their ideas to other scholars more easily. And this was the beginning of the Scientific Revolution, the Protestant Reformation, and later the Enlightenment, which is going to be our next big unit in world history. Alright, the Scientific Revolution, we're going to be talking about that next, and as kind of examples of that, I've got three famous people here. You can see we have Isaac Newton there, one of the people who understood gravity before almost anyone else. We have René Descartes. He was a famous philosopher and scientist who believed that everything had to be proved. He's the one who came up with the idea, I think, therefore I am. And then we also have Nicholas Copernicus there. He's the one who discovered the heliocentric model of astronomy. I wouldn't say discovered, but he was the one who popularized it, I should say. With many scientists, it's not exactly they're the first ones to ever think of these things, but it turns out that they're the ones who end up making it popular and more well known to people. Except Newton, I'm pretty sure he invented calculus, almost on accident, which is a funny story. So, before I talk about the Scientific Revolution, let's talk about the decline of traditional culture, or medieval culture, would be another way of saying it. There was a big migration of people from the countryside to the city, and people demanded that governments help out during hard times. This was very different than how it was before, to where, if you remember the feudal system, basically, if life was tough, oh well, that's just the way it is. This was after the Black Death, after the big plague that had swept through Europe. A lot of people were trying to find rational explanations for what happened in life without just believing it was fate, or maybe it was the work of magic or spirits or something like that. So the Scientific Revolution, it ironically began with a belief in magic. How was this? Well, there was a belief in things like alchemy and astrology. Alchemy being kind of this way that people thought you could transmute one metal to another, and you could transform them using magic. And some people, some very smart people, even people like Isaac Newton, spent a very, very long time trying to understand this. They were trying to turn things like lead into gold, and they were trying to figure out how to do this. And the belief was originally that it was magic that would did it, but they were trying to kind of understand it. And alchemy actually led to the development of what we now know as as chemistry. And the same thing with astrology, which was that people believed that the stars and the planets, and when they were at a certain place in the night sky, it would change your life. That's called astrology, and it still exists to some extent today. You can still look at astrology even in your local newspaper, and that's the difference between understanding the stars in an astrological sense as opposed to astronomy, which is the scientific research of space and the stars. So people were trying to understand kind of these magical forces in the world, and what they ended up doing was discovering the natural structure of the world instead. So scientists use experiments and mathematics to prove structure in the universe, that light will work a certain way every time. Gravity will work a certain way every time. There are these fundamental forces in the universe that create things to work the way that they do. If I drop this pen here, and it's always going to drop this way towards the center of the earth. It's not like 1 out of 20 times it's going to fly up the other way. No, because of the laws of gravity and these scientific constants that we can see and understand and see every day, that's it creates structure in the universe. It's not just the work of fairies or magic or anything like that. The scientific revolution. I have the most famous scientist of all time, Doc Brown, now down over there. He was not during the scientific revolution. He came much later. He is also unfortunately fictional. People were discovering discrepancies in the writings of Aristotle, one of the famous ancient scientists from ancient Greece. Aristotle, he really tried his best, but he got a lot of things wrong just because he was trying to understand the world in a scientific way, and he was starting with basically nothing. So he was trying his best, but he got a lot of things wrong when it came to understanding science, and people were understanding what he got wrong. Scientists began to question previous assumptions, and they tried to replicate earlier experiments. And this was the first use of the scientific method. Remember, the scientific method is where you hypothesize something, you create an experiment, you come up with data, and then you try to replicate it. Replication is really one of the most important parts of science in general. It's that if you get this amazing thing to happen just once and you can't replicate it, well, that's not really science. It's just kind of a freak accident that happened. Science, one of the most important parts about it is that it will something will work the same way every time if you test it in a certain way. An important idea from this time, I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, is that everything had to actually be proven. You couldn't just expect... Everyone was trying to understand what caused events to happen. If we can remember the Black Plague, which had just happened in Europe at the time, no one knew about germs or any of this stuff. So it was something to where they were trying to understand more about how the human body worked and how physics work and how planets worked, and they're trying to understand all these things all at the same time. This is where educated people kind of moved away from astrology, magic, and witchcraft, and tried to understand things more from a scientific view. So that's all I have to talk about the scientific revolution for today. Come back next time. This week we're going to be talking about the beginnings of the Protestant Reformation, which changed the ways that people thought as well. So we're going through times of amazing change in the Western world. The scientific revolution was a big part of that. The Renaissance was a big part of that. The Reformation's going to be a big part of that. And all three of those will come together and lead to what is known as the Enlightenment. And that's really going to be the next big thing that we talk about in this class. All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.